Okay, uh, let's roll. Luca, if I can ask you to come to the fore, turn on your camera. Thank you. Hi, Luca. I have introduced you at the beginning of the talk. So before I throw my first question at you, I just wanted to quickly say thank you again for joining us here. We know each other for a long time. Long before we left classrooms where people said, "Thank you, professor," to us. At the very beginnings of our careers, we met in Salerno and have been in touch ever since. And we're both close collaborators and students of, if I may say so, Jan Walsener. So we're kind of surfing maybe the same wave of cultural psychology of semiotic mediation. So maybe we're also sometimes suffering from the same fate that people tell us, it's so difficult to understand. What do you mean by semiotic mediation? Overdetermination? What do you mean by that stuff? I don't understand. And maybe we can shed some light on that as well today, even though I don't want to necessarily make this the main focus of our discussion, unless, of course, our audience would like to hear more about it. Your talk focuses very much on the ideas of epidemics and COVID-19 concretely. And I know that you've been involved in research projects that look at COVID-19 from different perspectives and lots of other research projects. And quite frankly, I don't know how you manage to do all the things that you do, but somehow you do. And you start out your talk with something that has become increasingly important to me in the last semester, because I have partially been teaching a course about this kind of riddle of emotion versus rationality. And you say that one of the ways in which, maybe if I put that in my own words, that the state is able to enact population control is by the control of affections. And I want you to elaborate a little bit on that. What you mean by that, emotions, affections, maybe versus rational thinking, and how so that emotions, affections maybe offer a different access point to population control than rational argument.
Oh, well, Martin, first of all, hi everybody. Thanks for joining. Hope the lecture was not, the keynote was not too boring. I try to do my best. Well, actually, this is a very huge question and very complex question. So I try to briefly answer to all the questions that you asked so far. So this has to do exactly with cultural psychology of semiotic dynamics. That has a very simple but complex view of how human beings deal with the experience of the world. And I try to be as simple as possible. So the idea is that we as human beings encounter the world around us or trade with the world around us starting from an affective relating to the world. By affecting, it means the world affects me in many ways. From this first contact emerges what we call semiotic mediation. So basically, in order to trade with the world, we as human beings, we produce and we interpret science. And we use and interpret science, so our experience of the world is mediated by science, both upon the world, so we use science in the relationship with the world and with the others, but also in regulating our own experience, our own emotion, and our own cognition. Okay, so it's an hetero and auto regulations through science. Okay, saying this, all the signs that are around us and everything basically can be a sign, requires interpretation. So we need to make meaning of these signs. And these very basic psychological mechanisms is, of course, everywhere in human collectives. So when you talk about the state, you must consider that the state, as we know it, is a very young invention, recent invention. It has few centuries. So this basic process works in every kind of human collective ever since prehistoric age, probably. What is the principle? The principle is that human beings use science to regulate other behavior, other conduct, other emotions. And this is very well known, especially in religions, in human religions. Human religions as are organized religions are basically system of science that regulate, that tells us or give us suggestions about how to feel, for instance. Okay, that's the basics. And this basic mechanism can be used and appropriated by every institution in order to suggest us how to feel, how to think. Fortunately, we have our own interpretation of this science. So we not necessarily comply with these social suggestions. It's a negotiation of meaning between the two.
Thank you, Luca. That ties in very well with a question that Ernst Schraube just asked. I'm going to read it to you. He says, thanks for a fantastic talk, and I hope I said that too, because that's really what it was. You talked about the relationship between agency and infectious diseases, especially the plague. What kind of expansion of agency would be required in relation to the corona crisis, and how can psychology as a science contribute to that?
Well, let me say this. Just yesterday, I participated to a lecture of Mia Couto. He is a famous Mozambican author. Is one of the most famous novelists, African novelists now. But he is also a biologist. And he was talking about the corona in Africa, the crisis in Africa, in relation to how the traditional medicines and the Western medicine deal with such a phenomenon. And the point is that the Western view is we must have mastery over nature, and viruses are parts of the nature. So controlling a virus is controlling the nature or the bad part of the nature. The traditional view is we are part of the nature as much as a virus. We have a bunch of viruses and bacteria that are part of our body, actually, normally. So we are not fighting against a kind of otherness. We are relating to the otherness. We are relating to a sub-part of the natural system. We are part too, okay? So here, the point of agency, in a certain sense, this kind of ecological view is still present in part of the world. But the Western tradition of agency says, okay, human beings have or have not the power to control natural forces. In ancient Greece, the idea was that human beings have no power to control natural forces because natural forces are gods. Modernity instead is this big shift. Human beings are the masters of the world, so they just have to find ways to control the nature. And this is exactly the moment in which the war metaphor enters medicine. So here, agency in our contemporary times, agency is understood as control over nature. The pandemic of COVID is interesting because somehow is a challenge to this idea of agency, because it brings us back to the times in which the only defense we have is to do nothing. This is basically the lockdown. The only defense that we have, the only form of agency we have so far is doing nothing and waiting for someone else who is this new kind of technology, scientific technology divinity to do something for us. Okay, and this creates a big existential contradiction, I think.
If I can ask you to elaborate a little bit more on that, because I find that one of the crucial points in your talk, you quote, for example, Susan Sontag and how she talks about the invention of bacteria. And in many ways, this invention of a descriptive system where we can say, there is the enemy, this is what the cause is also related to the rationalization of the world, right? We understand the world in many ways better if we have names that we can give to certain things. At the same time, it seems to me what we are experiencing right now in this kind of lost moment of we do nothing. And this doing nothing is not really recent, other than maybe with a particular kind of genealogy that you have offered, right? So we used to deal with plagues, with pandemics in a particular kind of way. And now we're doing sort of the same. We can go back all the way to the Middle Ages. Everyone stays at home. That's the best population control we can have in such a pandemic. We wear face masks. Yes, no. We can go back to the Spanish flu and say, okay, so they were wearing face masks. Now we wear face masks too. We don't really know whether it's good. It might not necessarily be bad, even though some people say. We don't really know what we're doing. So, and then at the same time, you show beautifully how in the past we looked at pandemics as something outerworldly, something caused by gods, or at least answers could be found in gods. So what I want to ask you here is this idea of a secularization of a better understanding of what's going on maybe much more a lie than we think? Are we much more relying on mythologizing what is happening to us? Are we much more just waiting, as you just said, for this kind of saint to walk in, the vaccine, the solution to the problem? And isn't that much more still a very religious way of thinking about what's happening to us, rather than a rationalized enlightenment thinking?
Well, you know, the point is that in human culture, in human civilizations, actually, one modality does not disappear. So, for instance, today, the religious view, the religious take on pandemics is still very present. There are millions of people that still believe in the same way that people from middle age, concerning, you know, the fact that the pandemic is a divine punishment and we cannot really do nothing but pray. If, for instance, in Brazil, you have hundreds of churches, of evangelic churches, that are exactly saying this: come to the church and pray, there is no other way. So the modalities, they still exist. Of course, there is one way of understanding science and technology, which is religious or mythological nowadays, of course. And there is also a third view, which is probably more recent, but at the same time is the more traditional, I mean, by traditional community, which is this idea that we are in an ecosystem. So we are part of all this. We are not separated from all this. So these three views are here today. But I want to tell you something. I think that there is a very interesting difference. That's why psychology should always study history. The comparison with the Spanish flu is interesting, because the Spanish flu, exactly like this pandemic, was a global phenomenon, was one of the first pandemics that was recorded by media, and has no, we don't know, still today we are not sure about the virus that produced this Spanish flu. Okay, so a lot of similarities, but while the Spanish flu led to the development of healthcare system, of the World Health Organization, for instance, this today pandemics is doing exactly the opposite, if I can say that. So is leading to the disruption of the sense of global solidarity, and is even threatening the existence of WHO. So I see something very meaningful in comparing these two events historically. But what is interesting is to look at the way people make meaning of these two events historically, even in presence of similar conducts, because basically the prevention measure, the lockdown that we have today, is very similar to the one that we had in the Spanish flu. And if you remember the early rumors about the COVID pandemic, it was at a certain point, it was said that the American troops, 30,000 American troops that were coming to Europe for a military something, I don't remember exactly what it was, would have spread coronavirus in Europe, which is a very interesting historical similarity with Spanish flu, that maybe someone say it was originated exactly by brought exactly by the American troops coming to Europe for the First World War. So you see, of course, we cannot compare history. I mean, we have to be careful to the historical, concrete social historical condition. But in terms of understanding, it's very interesting to look at these two phenomena.
Thank you, Luca. I'm going to turn to some more questions that came in from the audience. Casey is asking, it was a really thought-provoking talk, first of all, and yes, I agree. Why do you think some citizens are using the war rhetoric not to fight the virus as other, but to fight their governments for liberty from lockdown or quarantine?
Okay. In my talk, I try to define some, someone could call them narratives throughout history about the pandemics. I will call them some, or you could call them some social representations or things like that. I will talk about semiotic fields or fields of meaning. Okay, so the war semiotic field is very interesting, and it's a kind of general scheme that you can apply to almost everything. But once you have adopted the metaphor of war, well, you have an enemy, you need to fight, you have your own army. You are always fighting for the right cause, because the enemy, by definition, has the wrong cause. You are fighting for freedom, okay? And people should change the order of values, for instance. So when it comes to war, patriotism is more important, for instance, than other values, okay? So the field of meaning of war can be used in different ways, but once it is present in the collective life, I think it becomes very dangerous, because it's dangerous when you talk about war on nature. It's dangerous when you talk about war on China, war on virus, war on your own government. So basically, everybody can appropriate this field, and I think it can create disasters. Also because, and we come to the problem of atmosphere, because the metaphor of war draws on fear, not on responsibility. And drawing on fear, of course, channels people conduct toward a specific set of choices, range of choices. Appealing to responsibility of people or to solidarity of people leads to another way, so to a different way. And I think that this is a big choice, a big question today.
Niklas Kimiri is asking whether you have also considered how atmosphere may also connect to and feed on an existential anxiety of living a meaningless life. If you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, basically, I developed the concept of atmosphere during the war on terror time. Okay, nobody talks anymore about it. But the point was that I spent a lot of time in the United States during that period. And what struck me was the fact that there was a sense of undefined threat or undefined danger. And then I started to reason. I say, okay, what is the long-term effect on people of this? Okay, when you say there is an enemy somewhere, hidden somewhere, so you must be careful, you must be attentive. So fear, which is an emotion, so is temporary and has a specific object, becomes an existential state. That's why I think it leads to existential anxiety. But you can say, I think you can say this also for happiness, is exactly the same. So happiness is an emotion, is a temporary condition, but through the production of messages, it's and dissemination of messages is somehow becomes an existential condition. So the problem with existential condition is that there is no escape from that. And indeed, you have a kind of short circuit between the search for happiness and the production of anxiety.
I'd maybe like to press you a little more on that issue, because you are painting the picture of a kind of genealogy of different plagues, epidemics that we have experienced, and by that try to make sense of where we are right now in the COVID-19 scenario. At the same time, you're also saying that, for example, in the Middle Ages, such concepts as death have played a completely different role. Death was there every day. Death was maybe even welcome or celebrated to a certain extent. While today we live in a society where the fact that we eventually die, that people die, is basically ignored, pushed away to a different realm. So there are, if you want to, qualitative differences between those two times. And how do you bring that together with the kind of genealogy of a similar treatment of those outbreaks of diseases?
Okay, I try to give a short answer, but first let me tell you, my work has a big limitation, okay, is really focused on one part of the world. So we actually, and this is the way Europe or the Western world, what we generally call the Western world, made meaning of the pandemics, okay? So this is a big limitation. I'm aware. I have a place of of speech, which is very limited. Second, I don't see a genealogy. I was interested in understanding what are the basic psychological, psychosemiotic processes of making meaning of this, okay? Also because I took just, maybe the most famous episodes, but pandemics or epidemics, they are part of everyday life of human beings since then. So these are only the one that we remember historically. And sometimes we represent, for instance, the Black Death was there over 3 centuries. So this is not a pandemic. This is everyday life.
Right. Right.
So the waves of plague were coming, going and coming. So this is a kind of narrative, of course. So what I'm interested is to put in relation the semiotic processes of self-regulation, of emotion self-regulation, with the collective processes of self-regulation and of emotional and regulation and channeling. And I try to show this process through the example of plague and pandemics over history.
The final question for our session today, because we're slowly running out of time, is maybe a simple one, yet maybe a really difficult one to answer. We will see. Nandita is asking, thank you for an excellent analysis, Luca. What would be the ways out of this? What seems to be an endless need to have this sort of system to look up to in dealing with uncertainty? Can we take the risk of removing this larger than life explanation and leave people to their own resources? I agree with your analysis, but as solutions, I would like to know your views on this.
Well, I don't know exactly what Nandita means by solutions. If you take an ecological view, it's not a matter of solution. I mean, we are part of a system, and these are dynamics of a system. What I think we need a solution for is the fact that we systematically go back to the use of the metaphor of war. This is going to kill human civilization. The fact that the only solutions, the ready-made solution is to activate this field of meaning of war. This is so dangerous because it sets up a way of relating to otherness. So we set ourselves as other from nature, as other from other human beings. And we establish war has the most fruitful way of solving problem. I think that this is the thing we need a solution for. This is the thing we need a solution for. And there is no progress in this. As I've tried to show through our history, we never learn this lesson.
Nandita says that, of course, she agrees with you. And yes, so maybe this is one of the big steps that we still have to take and analyze the metaphor of war and how we end up in those scenarios. There is another question coming in, for which we unfortunately don't have the time to get to right now, but we will take this over to Slack. And Luca, I know you are on Slack as well, so I think we can continue the discussion there. Thank you so much for being part of our conference, and yeah, stay with us and enrich our discussions. Thank you so much, Luca. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing all this.
Thank you. See you later. Bye.
Bye.